Hi, it's Zoe Routh, and if you're a first-time listener, welcome to the show. I'm so grateful to have you here. And if you're a return listener, thanks for tuning in again. I'm so grateful to everyone to let me share the space between their ears, for a little while anyway, in a non-creepy, not kind of weird way. Well, today we have Kieran Flanagan, and she's the co-founder of the Impossible Institute. She is hilarious and extremely intelligent. I really love speaking with her on this interview. She is a speaker, a trainer, and author who helps organizations and individuals harness the commercial power of creativity. She really focuses on commercial creativity, and I was struck by her genius in that. She demystifies a whole bunch of myths that come with creativity and helps us punters like me and you do creativity a whole bunch better. She is rated in the top 25 C-suite speakers to watch by Meetings and Conventions USA. And she has been one of the youngest creative directors to lead an award-winning agency. And she was the smarts behind the most successful product launch in Australian history. She's headed up Australia's premier creative school, won awards all over the planet for her thinking and effectiveness, and is also on the faculty at Thought Leaders International. So she's awesome, and I hope you'll enjoy this interview as much as I did. Let's do it. Welcome, Kieran. I'm so excited to have you here and to talk about all the wonderful work that you do. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, how did you get started co-founding the Impossible Institute with Dan Gregory?
Well, I guess the co-founding the Impossible Institute was reasonably natural, as it wasn't our first business together. Dan and I had an advertising agency early in our careers, and I actually met Dan in creativity school, you could call it, and we worked for another guy who was starting an advertising agency, and we became co-owners of that business as we built it alongside him. So I think founding the Impossible Institute was a fairly natural progression from having people, I guess, pay us to solve the problems to teaching other people how to solve the problems. We decided that we could potentially help more if we taught people the process rather than being, ta-da, we have the answer and aren't we special?
Well, that's a big distinction, right? So teaching people how to be creative. And I know, because I've heard you speak and I suffer this from myself, is like, I think of creative people as they're like gifted with this magical genius that allows them to spew forth these amazing ideas. And it's a little bit intimidating for those of us who consider ourselves non-creative. But I know you think that's a myth. So tell me a little bit about how you teach people to be creative.
Yes, I do think it's a giant myth. It's a useful myth in a way to isolate creativity and pretend there's a magical unicorn quality to it. That, you know, you vomit rainbows and you sparkle with your ideas. I think creative people have sort of put themselves away a little and went, yes, we're very special. But I don't believe that. And I used to run Australia's creative school called Award, and I've taught all kinds of thinkers and people from all kinds of fields and backgrounds to be creative. I'm using my fingers to make inverted commas, everybody. So I have seen firsthand that it's a skill, not a talent. And most of us, you're right, we think it's a talent. We think it's effortless, it's easy. We use so much language around creativity to reinforce this, a moment when the inspiration struck, the muse, a flash of inspiration, a stroke of genius. We use all that kind of language to reinforce the notion. But creativity is a whole lot of hard work. It literally is relentless curiosity and a willingness to keep going in the face of rejection and getting your ideas that don't work. It's as much getting ideas that don't work as it is as getting ideas that work. And if you play a numbers game, at some point, an idea just crumbles. And it's this magic moment where you've been chipping away at it and it's almost like you hit that magic point and it feels like the idea is effortless at that moment often. But like most things, getting to that point takes a whole lot of sweat. I call it brain sweat. You need a sweaty brain, but most of us don't actually think of it that way, and we think our brain doesn't need to do that much work. So teaching people to do the work is, I guess, the biggest thing we do around creativity.
I like that idea of brain sweat and the idea that you hit this like magical point where you chip, 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 and ta-da! Is there like some sort of numerical guideline to that, or does it differ from project to project?
It does differ, but I joke, and in my experience, most people fall in love with their second or third idea. So that most human beings who don't think they're creative, by the way, I should make a distinction now that when I say creativity, I mean creativity as in problem solving and thinking, not artistry. And most of us have gotten really confused about that as well. At school, we tend to pick a side. Well, we're on the creative side or the mathematical science side. And I don't think that distinction's helpful or true, because mathematics and science and that side actually require creativity and problem solving. And artistry can or may not be creative. It can go either way. And your ability to draw is not your ability to think. And you can be hopeless at art and super creative. So I think that's hugely important distinction for people to hold in their mind while we're talking creativity. But creativity is, so most people fall in love with their second or third ideas. So they do one idea, it's not very good. They do another idea, it's so much better that it looks very attractive. They often do a third to be diligent, and it's not very good again. So the second one is the one they go for. Sometimes they extend it out to 5. So they do 1, and number 2 and number 3 look pretty good, and 4 and 5 are bad. So they go back to that middle ground. Whereas we do hundreds of ideas, thousands of ideas.
Oh my God.
You just wear away obvious. You wear away reasons that won't work. And your brain's an amazing machine in a way. It's almost the more parameters you put in place, the more you back it into a corner, it's suddenly you're able to solve your way out of it. And that only happens usually with volume.
You back your way into a corner by just pushing and pushing, pushing, and then all of a sudden you get the breakthrough idea.
Yeah. Or
Wow.
sometimes, we always look for answers, not the answer. I like to have multiple options on the table that work really powerfully. And then it becomes a choice, not there's only one. And again, school tends to teach us to seek out the answer. We get this there's the right answer and the wrong answer versus how many answers can you come up with? And then we can start to evaluate them based on what we want and what we're looking for and the outcomes we want.
That's amazing. So I'm thinking about your latest book, Forever Skills, and thinking about this process. How many book titles and straplines did you put together to come up with Forever Skills?
Many. We knew the problem we wanted to solve, which was this constant panic and sense of overwhelm that was happening around the change conversation. And we knew we wanted to solve that problem, or to make a dent in that problem, for people to give them another anchor and perspective to say, hang on a second, let's take a breath and let's get, a little bit of perspective around this issue. So we knew the problem we wanted to solve, but we did lots of iterations. Is it transferable skills? Is it forever skills? Is it forever thinking? Is it the change matrix? Is it the 3 spheres of change? There's so many options that you can do. And, they're just the ones off the top of my head. But at some point you go, yeah, we think it's going to be that one. And you just work out the problem you want to solve. You go, will it, is it memorable? Is it unique? Is it interesting? Does it pique your attention? Does it explain something that we haven't had language for before? But is it familiar enough language that people can take a guess as to what it means? Because again, with thinking, you don't want it to be so abstract that no one gets it. We always say, make it new enough. How do you anchor a new idea into familiarity? Because the brain does better with that.
Yeah, that's good. So that's good that you had, it wasn't just about creating all these different options. You also had criteria to evaluate the options.
Yes,
as well.
And you always need to. Judgment is a massive part of creativity, and creative judgment becomes something you develop as well. And I guess when you have a role as running an agency or being the creative director, as I spent a lot of my career as, you really have to work on that judgment skill, and you have to balance multiple reasons why an idea is right based on criteria. And a lot of people, you know, which is the best idea? You might have multiple good ideas on the table from multiple teams, but what solves the problem in the ways we need it solved becomes hugely important. You know, we used to run something called Masterclass, and we used to take the best students out of creative school and run them through a survival intense thing where people got thrown out every week.
Really? Like you took them out into the bush to do stuff, or you
No,
just
no, just and they got a creative brief every week, and they'd bring their work in, and then the people that just weren't as good got thrown out. You're like, thank you, it's time to go.
it's
I
a
know.
bit brutal.
I came through that system myself, so it just is what we always did. But we used to teach people in masterclass to listen for the R's. There was this moment when I remember this amazing young guy. He owns an agency in New York now. He's probably not so young anymore. Time ticks by for all of us. But anyway, his name was Scott. And we remember telling them to listen for the wisdom of the group, because we're saying your judgment's better than your ability to self-judge. And your self-judgment, for most of you, will come with time, but initially it's terrible. So we used to say, you can listen for the moment where the room will go, and nod. Anyway, I'll never forget, he really had to work very hard. It wasn't natural for him, but he was just relentless about his work. And he stood up one day with this fantastic idea, and he held it up, he explained it, and the room went, and nods. And he looked at us, he said, I'm going to sit down now. I'm not going to show you anything else. This is this wonderful moment where he saw it and heard it. And yeah, he had nothing to prove from that point on. It was really a great moment where you go, I know when it ticks all the boxes I needed it to.
And that's great. I wonder how many iterations he had to go through before he got to that. Yeah,
many. He tells the story about how many times he even applied to get into creative school.
Oh my God.
It wasn't natural for him. He would say he worked his butt off to be the creative leader he is.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's a really useful frame for people to know, is that to do something good, you're not just brushed with the genius wand. No. With the unicorn sprinkle dust.
So sparkly.
You have to actually work for that sparkle. And it reminds me a little bit of listening to James Clear when he talked about, he has a very methodical way of doing everything. But he had like a whole spreadsheet with 8 pages worth of different subtitles or different titles for his book. And I thought, oh my goodness, I thought you probably liked that little anecdote that he came up with.
I do. Well, it's exactly what we teach. You know, it's not accidental. And people think ideas are accidental. And they seldom are. And, you know, particularly ideas on repeat. Like most people can maybe have a good idea in their lifetime. But to do it on demand, to do it repeatedly, and, you know, when other people demand it of you, it means it has to become a skill. You just can't hope that lightning strikes. You always go to people, you need a lightning rod. You need a really big lightning rod to get those ideas in. And James is a perfect example of that. It's a methodical working structure to allow him to explore possibilities.
Oh, that's beautiful. Do you think you need other people to be creative, or is it best to do creativity on your own?
I think a mix. I think to be creative, you have to be really broadly curious. The creative people I know can be quite introverted and like to retreat to mull, but also they tend to be quite widely curious, and they're interested in a lot of things and a lot of people, because ideas are often hybrids. And they're often taking that thing from over there and bringing it to another place and reapplying it in a way you haven't seen before. Because, you know, ideas often rely on shortcuts and cultural memes and things that will transmit thinking in another vehicle. So for that reason, you need it to be a mix. So having multiple inputs is hugely important, but also having time to think to yourself. I always say to clients, brainstorms are great as long as you've got something to bring to the table. When you have a cold brainstorm, and you've all probably been through this, where you show up and we've gone crazy and you've got bean bags and too much candy, lollies, and coloured pencils, because we're being creative, again, wacky, that you don't really come up with anything particularly useful. And you can do anything you want. There's no rules here. Versus we've set a problem. Everyone's gone away and done some thinking about it. And now we're going to bring the ideas to the table and build on them and critique them and question them and add them together and challenge them. And when you do that, interesting magic starts to happen. But again, it's an iterative process. It's a way of going yes and building on top of it as you go. So brainstorms are good with fodder.
Fodder. I love that word.
Yeah,
Brain
it's
fodder.
Creative fodder. We used to call it creative fodder. And you just go, you need things to put out there to decide, and you need things to put out there to have an opinion on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Otherwise, like going in cold, it's like trying to pluck something out of the air.
Yeah, and hope, and it's a wish and a hope that for some reason, and not having a problem to solve is one of the biggest problems. It's incredibly difficult to come up with an idea. Well, an idea for what? The problem is most people think they're not creative because they can't think of anything. They can't think what they want to have for dinner. What do you want for dinner? People, I don't know. I don't know what I want for dinner. What do I want for dinner? So we can't even tell ourselves that most of the time. What do you want for Christmas? I don't know. What do you want for Christmas? So these are the questions that you go, well, we can't even solve that. But the more we give people very specific problems to solve, it's much easier to say, for example, how do you get people to use the stairs, not the escalator, than it is to go, just come up with an idea. So already your brains and everyone's brain that would be listening would go, well, how would we get people to take stairs, not escalators? How would we get people to not sit at their desks all day? The more creative people see problems and they seek them out. They're curious about problems, I think.
So that's framing the problem a little bit different. Like, how do we get people to be more active is different than saying how we can get them to do this instead of that, or stand up more at work. Is that what you mean? Sort of like nutting down the problem to...
Yeah, look, the more specific you get, the better your solve will be. But also, if I just said to you, come up with an idea, that's incredibly hard. I just picked an example that how do we get people to take the stairs, not the escalator?
Right.
And you can see by narrowing down, you already are more likely to have an idea than just, have you got a creative idea today, Zoe?
Oh my God.
And so often we go into brainstorms and we go, hey, people, have you got a creative idea? We're open to anything. Not have you got any ideas on?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Do you need specific conditions to spark creativity? We talked about don't go into a brainstorm cold. So having some fodder, having a problem to solve. Are there any other sort of, environmental conditions? Like, do you need a bright space? Do you need a closed space? Do you need lots of room or little room? Do you need stimulants in the room, like visual stimulants, or do you just need a clean desk? Like, what?
Look, again, I think that varies very much on your brain type and the type of person you are. I do know that we used to have a creative saying that not coming up with the idea is part of coming up with the idea. So not to stress when you don't have an idea, but to keep pushing your brain and pushing options and, and changing the environment, I would say. Sitting your team in a room for 5 hours brutally trying to extract ideas when they're not flowing. Often it's about how do you create a shift of input and trust that your brain is solving the problem. So, and again, there's a difference between just ignoring it. But sometimes when I had creative people struggling, I would send them out to do something else. I'd go, you know what, just leave it for now. Just go to a movie. It's funny how often you'd be sitting in the movie, watching the movie, and something would spark an idea. So getting input from different sources at that point can be hugely helpful, because it's not a clean process. It's a messy process. And I think that's why people associate wacky creativity, because you've kind of got to get to the point you feel hopeless and you don't know if you've got anything and you can't, and to push through that and to get ideas from lots of places and to be quiet and to be in noise and to look for stuff and not look for stuff and stare at a blank page. I call it blankophobia, to sit with a blank page and be okay with the blankophobia. And, it's this sort of interesting process about yourself on some way as well. Are you willing to be wrong? Are you willing to put a terrible idea on the table? Willing to push beyond what's comfortable? Are you willing to express that thing that maybe you shouldn't, because you can kind of think of reasons why it won't work? But maybe if you share it with someone, they can help solve those.
I think those are interesting questions, actually. Are you willing to feel uncomfortable? Are you willing to be wrong? And that's where I think a lot of people shy away from doing creative work, because no, they don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to be seen as wrong. How do you help people develop that kind of emotional resilience around their ideas?
I think it's about, how do you create a safe space where you put ideas out and you're okay for them to be torn down. Creative people get very good at rejection. And people used to ask me a lot why the number of women was so much less in the advertising industry than men. And there's many reasons for it. And I'm not sure, but if this is true, but Dan actually said to me once, he goes, I wonder if men are just better naturally at rejection, because traditionally we were the ones asking women out. So we were much more comfortable with, am I your card? And women get really affronted by rejection as a natural. I think we've seen a shift, but I wonder if it's true. And I think you just have to work on yourself, and you have to understand that you're not your ideas. So the criticism is of the idea. That sort of third item is just, you have to learn to separate the two. And it isn't easy. And some people can't bear it. So the advice is just get really good at distancing yourself from the idea. It's why it's important to draw it or write it down, or, to make it a thing that separates it from you. So the idea,
get it out of your head,
not my idea. Put it down on a paper so it's a third thing and it isn't you. So if I stand up and I say, this is my idea, it's very personal, versus I've got this idea and it's sort of on the table. And also the more options you have, the more comfortable you get at killing them. You just do. You go, well, I can't make them all. The goal for us is always have great multiple options on the table. So we agonize over what to kill, not what to make.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's a better, it's an abundance mentality, isn't it? As opposed to, I only have this one or two ideas. I don't want to kill either of them.
And if they don't work, I'm in trouble. Versus, wow, we've got lots of things that could be wonderful. And, you look in, so the advertising award, for example, you used to teach young creative people, I go, go and look at how many great bits of work have been done for washing powder, for example, to tell us that it gets our clothes clean or makes our whites whiter. There's so many wonderful ways to solve that problem of, it's a communication one in that bucket. But, they still keep coming up with beautiful ideas, and it's as old as products themselves. So there's no shortage of good ideas. It's that willingness to trust that there's still another way to solve it.
Oh, that's really helpful. You just think about it. It's like, people have been trying to sell soap for a long time. Yeah. And they keep coming up with different stories and images around and words around it. So,
I mean, Hollywood, look how many, Hollywood's been selling us the same stories, throughout history and books and things. And there's still really interesting ways to wrap up those stories.
You know what? I'm a bit over like Spider-Man, though. Do we really need 3 different versions of Spider-Man? Come on.
That's very confusing.
I know. I'm like, I can't remember who's this.
And at what point is it not creativity? So, at what point is it rehash and repetition versus creating something new? And I think that becomes a question for us all to wonder about. And people do get sick of the same. So as we always say, make it new enough. So what's the new bit? And I think that's what you're resisting, is there's nothing new enough in it that you go, just feels the same. I've just given another 2 hours of my life the same.
Yeah. Whereas I think, like, for example, when you're looking at big movies like that, the James Bond series with the latest James Bond, they just made him different enough, like new enough. Yeah. Like he was a totally different iteration. He was a bit rough around the edges, a bit brutal compared to the Mr. Suave, swanky, and misogynistic / sexist kind of version, which was playful for its time. Yes. You wrote an article recently, which I thought was fantastic, about fixed growth and creative mindsets. And I thought that was a lovely set of distinctions about how the creative mindset is one step further. I think you called it level 11 on growth mindset. Can you talk us through what you mean by that?
By a level 11.
The level 11, how does the creative mindset take the growth mindset to a whole new level?
Well, I think the creative mindset is slightly more, I'm going to say kamikaze. It's probably not the right thing to say, but you seek it out. So I think a growth mindset is still responsive to the place we find ourselves in. And I think a creative mindset is a bit putting ourselves in the place. So that's why it's level 11. It's just we're seeking out problems, not embracing problems. Oh, there's a problem that's showing up. I better embrace it. Is a growth mindset. Whereas a creative mindset is, where's a problem I can solve? So we actually put ourselves into a space of this growth, and we do it voluntarily and willingly. And we want to do it over and over and over again because it becomes incredibly rewarding and fun. So we almost find the fun in the challenge of growth. So again, it's very similar. Like there's a lot of crossover, but it just dials it up and it makes you excited to jump in. And the other's a bit more put up with it.
Yeah, I get that. I think there's a lot of mindset work that goes on to being successful in the creative space. What do you think is your most important beliefs?
Well, I think I've talked about a couple of them. So that there's always more than one way to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. So that there's always multiple answers, that you are not your ideas. They're not you personally. That you shouldn't be so arrogant to presume that you can change the world. I think it's been an important belief that you think the world needs changing, that you get all righteous, that that you hold a service mindset. Is this useful? Not you're broken and I need to fix you and let me show you the way. I think that becomes really important for creative people, that they don't lose touch with why they want to fix things and solve things. That it becomes that you're still in service, and often create young creative people that you bring into the industry with this naive notion that they're going to be cooler and more elite and a bit more special. And I'm like, no, you're actually in the pop culture game. You're in the game of mass, and how do you affect and help mass thinking, and can you change behavior at scale? And look, again, if we delve into artistry, sometimes its ability is to challenge smaller pockets and sometimes big pockets. But I think commercial creativity, which is what I teach and live and breathe, is about how do you get scale to the creativity and how does it have a purpose that it serves. And I think that's been a really key belief and important for me.
That's really fascinating work. So how do you actually cause behavioral change at scale?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it. There's so many clever, creative people who, in all kinds of fields, science and mathematics and companies and entrepreneurs and schools, and they're everywhere and they're sparking change on the scale with their thinking. They're challenging the way we've always done things. They're wondering why not and what if. And that's creativity, I think. Well, commercial creativity. It's like, well, what's the use of it? What does it do? It's not just here to be cool or challenging or provocative for no reason. It's here to serve and to drive positive change.
Yeah, I love that. So as a very curious person, speaking of, I'm curious too, but I think you're more curious. What are you most curious about people?
Look, my favorite thing, I have a tool that I sometimes teach, which I call the behavior gap. And I'm most curious about the gap between what people say they do and what they actually do. I think great products sit in that gap and they go, people want this, but they do this, and we can help them get closer to where they want to be.
I think that's a perennial problem, isn't it? Like that's where all bad habits sit. That's where all lost hopes and dreams sit. That's where all these aspirational desires sit and are yet not fulfilled. So I love that. I love that as a purpose for commercial creativity. So how do you can get people to bridge that chasm and to get to where they want to go. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it keeps me busy because it's always the way, it's just, that's human beings. I'm eternally interested in people and not who, this sort of dichotomy of who they think they should be and who they really are. And freedom comes with accepting who they are, and in that acceptance of designing and creating ways for them to get closer to who they'd love to be. And I think that for me is the best work, when someone gets out of their own way and is able to create a new possibility. That's the ultimate creativity, right? Is how do you create a new possibility for yourself? So they worry less about the gap and they worry about, ways they can. So if you can create new systems for yourself, if you can create a new belief for yourself, if you can create a new frame for yourself, when you get to help people do that stuff, it's transformative. And it's still creativity, because the ultimate creativity is creating yourself, right? It's creating beliefs and behaviors and ways of seeing the world that allow you to move forward.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was just stunning. I'm just sitting here letting all that wisdom just ting into my brain. The ultimate creativity is creating yourself. And you're right. If you can help people adopt beliefs and frameworks and systems in order to move them towards that, that is the best creative expression. So that sounds very personal. And so do you work on like both the personal and organizational level? So how does that work in the context of your work?
Yeah, no, my work is very varied. Imagine creativity. And I don't think you can, I'm not sure you can affect one without the other. I don't think, again, life is not linear nor tidy. We like it to be. We like to go, well, if we fix this, human beings go up to our offices and our workplaces, fundamentally create the culture and the belief systems, and they create the energy and the momentum and all those things. So unless we deal with that, we can't necessarily create a new frame for the organization. So you do need to address both. I was working with a big tech company recently, and one of the women on the program, she said, and often it's the work of, I'd checked out. Like had given myself the belief that they didn't need me, that I wasn't the right fit, that, I was just showing up. I don't think anybody wants to show up to work and have it not matter that they were there. And, by creating a new possibility for her with tools and thinking, and none of the work was about that, but she suddenly found herself, she rang me and she was just so excited. And she said, my whole world's changed. It had nothing to do, nothing to do with me, except, hey, here's some information. But her whole system changed, and her belief changed, and her energy changed, and her intention changed. And imagine she created a different framework, and all of a sudden her entire work changed. It's, it's what you create, right?
Yeah.
And it's what
amazing.
you create. And we can't always control what happens to us, which is said all the time. But we can create a response that helps us progress forward. And I think that's some of the most interesting work we do. We can't control what our competitors do in the marketplace, but we can create a response that allows us to progress forward. We can't control what life throws at us, but we can create, a way and a framework for us to move forward. I always say resilience is a creative skill, because it's, how do I create a possibility I can get on with life with.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I do a lot of work in helping people reframe their experiences and how they're thinking about a situation, which is a creative process in itself. And I love that you've linked those two things together. I hadn't seen that link before.
Most people think resilience is an endurance sport.
Yeah.
And it's what we think. How much can I tolerate? How much can I endure? How much can I survive? Versus how do I create a belief and a framework and a possibility that allows me to step forward? And they might be tiny, itty bitty steps, but it allows me to keep momentum forward, not get stuck in the past. I think that's the ultimate beautiful creative skill.
It is. That's awesome. So one last final question. You've published a few books. You've always doing something new. What are you creating next?
Well, it's an excellent question. A couple of TV show ideas
Really? You're going to have
in
your
the
own
pipe.
TV show?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. That it's just again, creative people are always creating crazy ideas and things that could happen. So there's a couple of thoughts around that are getting looked at and developed, and I'm just considering what the next book will be actually, and I think it will be a book that goes much more into the heart of commercial creativity and looks into that bucket. So just in the process of that, and a couple of new keynotes as well, actually. So just working away, it's eternal, and the fun thing is that it doesn't stop, and you keep playing, and it is play and joy. But I think the world is starting to realize as AI increases that their creativity needs go up. So I think it's a really exciting time as well to work in the space. And so many businesses and companies are ready to go, well, it's not just the formulaic thinking, and it's not just the being good at systems, and it's not just being efficiency experts coming in. Maybe it's actually about what we can create that will define future success. So I think that's a really great time for all of us really in business to sort of be around, and good for me because that's what I can help with.
Oh, that's great. I'm so looking forward to what comes next and to reading your work. You're so eloquent and so smart and insightful. It's just been a pleasure talking with you today. So thank you so much, Kieran.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Zoe. It is always a joy to get to the privilege of to talk about what you love to do.
I think Kieran Flanagan has got to be one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. I loved her exquisite insights. They were so beautifully distilled. They rang like temple bells for me. It was just a delight to hear her observations about how things connect and how things go together in the commercially creative space. A couple of key points I took away from that is brain sweat. Work it until the ideas come forth. Back yourself into a creative thinking corner until the only way out is through with a brilliant idea. Another piece was to frame the problem and to really use the problem as a center point for generating ideas. You can't just pluck good ideas out of thin air. And the third piece is that creativity is a skill for resilience. I love that. I thought that was awesome. Something for you that we have coming up is that we have an innovation masterclass in Canberra on February 4th, and it gives us thinking tools to help generate creative ideas. So when we have the tools and filters and frameworks, it can actually help gear our brain into action to develop some amazing commercially creative ideas. So if you want to check that out, the link will be in the show notes, and I'd love to see you there generating some awesome ideas. In the meantime, live well, lead well.